Guys, what's going on? I hope you guys are well. Hope you guys are staying safe. I hope everything's good at your end. Guys, so someone's asked me that where would it place Manny Pacquiao in the pound for pound list if he was to defeat Errol Spence. Personally, he also asked, would it place him above Canelo Alvarez? Would Manny Pacquiao beating Errol Spence, should he be pound for pound number one? Again, pound for pound is very subjective. Pound for pound is something that, it's just your opinion really on what you think and what the Ring Magazine. Right now, Manny Pacquiao's not ranked in the top 10 because he hasn't really fought for 2 years. And you can't put somebody in the pound for pound list that he hasn't fought for 2 years. And when he gets in the ring with Spence, he'll be over 2 years out. But if he was to beat Spence, bearing in mind his previous resume, would that surpass Canelo at number one pound for pound? Would he go straight to number one? It's very subjective. A lot of people will say no. Some people will say yes. In my humble opinion, right, and it's just my humble opinion, I don't want to get shot down for this because I know there'll be a lot of people that will probably disagree with my opinion, and some of you may agree, some of you may not agree. But I believe he would be pound for pound number one. I'll tell you why, and I'll give you my reason why. Because firstly, I think in the last couple of years, when was the last time Canelo fought Golovkin? It was a while back. What we're looking at, probably 2017, it was 2018, probably 4 years ago. I can't remember when he last fought him. Manny Pacquiao would have beaten, by the way, Golovkin's in nobody's top 10 pound for pound right now either. Manny Pacquiao would have beaten a top 5 pound for pound fighter in Errol Spence. Undefeated, in his prime, unified welterweight champion. A guy that most people think is the next big thing in American boxing. And which he is. Spence is the real deal, without question. If he was to beat Errol Spence, right? And I'm not going to say, well, because he's 42 years of age, because that in pound for pound, your age shouldn't matter, because you shouldn't get extra credit just because you're 42. That don't mean anything. But here's why I would put Manny Pacquiao pound for pound number one. He'd beat Errol Spence because of if he beats Errol Spence for all those reasons that I said just earlier. The fact that he's unified, the fact that, he's in his prime, he's undefeated, he's in the top 5 pound for pound list. And then with a win like that, then you have to bring in his other resume that he's got. Because a lot of people, when people talk about Canelo, they'll bring his resume 3-4 years ago, right? But Manny Pacquiao's last fight before Spence was Keith Thurman. So then he fought Broner before that. And then he fought Matisse before that. Jesse Vargas in between that. I know he had a loss with Horn, but most of us thought he won that. We can go on. And Manny Pacquiao's resume is unbelievable. It's the best resume in boxing, without question. Without question, Manny Pacquiao's got the best resume in boxing. And I feel like you have to then start looking into that when ranking him, because he would have just beaten a top fighter. Pound for pound isn't, either way, if he beats Spence and you look at it, what has he done for me lately? He would have just beaten Errol Spence, and nobody in the top 10 really is beating anybody of that kind of level. Like, who has Canelo in his last couple of fights beaten like as good as Errol Spence? Nobody really. But if Canelo beats Plant, you can make an argument that Canelo Alvarez would have beaten Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, 3 undefeated champions in a weight division in 9 months. That's pound for pound material right there, number one material. But does the Errol Spence win surpass? Because Errol Spence is better than all those 3 guys. He's, like I said, none of those 3 guys are even in the top 20 pound for pound, or even top 25 or 30 pound. You'll probably name 20, 30 fighters better than them. So I don't know. It's a tricky one because Canelo would have beaten a lot of undefeated champions, whereas Pacquiao would have beaten one. And let's put it this way: if you look at Pacquiao, if Pacquiao was to beat Spence, the win before that, right? And we're all talking hypothetical because most people think Manny's going to lose against Spence. If you go back and look at the fight before Spence, it was Keith Thurman. And Keith Thurman is better than really anyone Canelo Alvarez is. Like, he's better than Billy Joe, he's better than Caleb Plant, and he's better than Callum Smith, really. He was a unified champion. None of those guys have been unified champions. And Keith Thurman was a top fighter. And he's got a good resume as well. He beat Garcia, beat Sean Porter. So you have to, when you look at those guys and look at those resumes, Thurman was better than them as well. So his last two wins would be Keith Thurman and Errol Spence. So that alone, for me, is far stronger than what Canelo has beaten in Billy Joe. See, it's like, what's better? What's better? Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Billy Joe, Caleb Plant and Callum Smith, or Keith Thurman or Manny Pacquiao. I mean, Keith Thurman or Errol Spence. You'd have to say Keith Thurman and Errol Spence. Those guys are better than the three guys that Canelo's beat. But I feel like you have to take the duration in which Canelo has cleaned out a division into account as well. So that's why it's a real tough one. It's a pick'em. For me, it's a pick'em on who you will want to place as pound for pound number one. I won't, you know, if someone says to me that, oh, Pacquiao goes to number one, I'm not going to argue with you. If somebody says, well, no, Canelo's number one, I'm not going to argue with you. It's one of them. It's kind of like, what do you like? Because like I just said to you, for me, Pacquiao's last two fights, he's fought at a much higher level than what Canelo's been fighting at in his division, which is no fault. He's beating what's out there. He's beating what's out there in his division, but the division isn't very strong. So, in comparison to the welterweight division, right, you know, it's a lot stronger. If Manny Pacquiao was to, you know, beat Bud Crawford as well, or so, have another big win, then he'd put himself within no doubt of being pound for pound. But I do think it'd be a pick'em, just because, like I said, you've got to bear in mind the quickness in Canelo would become undisputed. That has to be taken into consideration. So yeah, it's a tough one. But Canelo and Pacquiao both are great fighters. But pound for pound for me is very subjective. It's what you like. It's, you know, if you like that, he likes that, she likes that. It's very subjective. It's very subjective. But I think that if Pacquiao was to beat Spence, I think who you place number one pound for pound between him and Canelo, I think is very subjective. Because like I said, what is it that you like? Because Pacquiao would have the better win, but Canelo would have more deeper resume in the last year and a half. And he would have cleaned out a division. So it's hard to put anyone ahead of Canelo. But then Pacquiao, you know, the fact that he would be someone like Errol Spence, who's in the top 5 pound for pound, you'd have to put him up there. You'd have to put him up there. Especially the fact that the fight before Spence was Thurman, in a fight that and let's not forget, these were fights that a lot of the boxing fans thought Pacquiao would lose. So I don't know. Whereas Canelo's fighting guys that although they're champions, they're guys that, you know, people expect him to beat, really. It depends on how you want to look at it. You can look at things from many different ways. I'm pretty sure the Canelo fans will say one thing. I'm sure the Pacquiao fans will have another thing to say. So it's a tough call, really. It's a tough call. Where you want to place them. But for me personally, I would put Pacquiao number one, just because I think incredible feat, beating a top 5 pound for pounder. And I think, like I said, the level of win would be higher than Canelo Alvarez's level of win. And if you look at his last 2 fights, see, pound for pound, you can look at it at time duration. You can look at his last 3 fights, you know. Pacquiao's last 3 fights are Adrian Broner, Keith Thurman, and Errol Spence, which is at a higher level than Canelo Alvarez's fights, last 3 fights. Because Canelo Alvarez's last 3 fights would be Plant. Let's do his last 4 fights. Plant, if he fights Plant in September. Or his last 3 fights currently are Billy Joe, Yildirim, and Callum Smith. So that is not better. That is not better than Spence, Thurman, and Broner. It's just not. So if we look at Canelo's last 3, if Pacquiao beat Spence, let's look at his last 3 fights. A win against Spence, a win against Thurman, and a win against Broner. Canelo's last 3 fights: win against Callum Smith, win against Yildirim, and a win against Callum Smith. Well, I'll let you guys decide on what you think's better. But then if you're doing it on duration, because Pacquiao's not fought in the last 2 years, so rightfully so, he's not on the top 10 pound for pound list. But if he beats Errol Spence, then you have to look at his last couple of fights. Even though the duration's further back, you have to look at his last couple of fights. And on that basis, you have to say, with the wins that he's had, wow. Because that's how some people think pound for pound is your last 3 fights. Some people think pound for pound is the duration. So it's what you've done for me lately, right? So if you're going to go on that basis, then Canelo Alvarez should be number 1. But if you're going to go on the last 3 fights, if Pacquiao does beat Spence, I think there's no contest. I think there's no contest on Pacquiao would be number 1. Because like I just said to you, Pacquiao's last 3 fights have been at a much higher level, right, than Canelo Alvarez. And Pacquiao's not in his prime, even though it doesn't come into it when you pound for pound, because it's just who you're beating. The fact is that the guy's fighting at a much higher level than Canelo. And Canelo's fighting at a very high level as well. But it's just not his fault that the division that he's in is quite weak. You know, Manny Pacquiao's in a tough division. You know, two of the guys that in Manny Pacquiao's division are in the top 5 pound for pound. You know, 2 of the guys in that division are in the top 5 pound for pound. And he's fighting one of them. So, yeah, it's tough. It's a tough call. It's a tough call. But I would say that if Pacquiao beats Spence, I do think he edges it pound for pound. But again, it's how you look at it. It's subjective. It's subjective. Do you look at it in the way that, well, you know, he's not really fought in the last 2 years, but if he was to beat Spence, do you look at his last 3 fights? But then do you look at it, well, Canelo's fought in the last 9 months, he's fought Callum Smith, he's fought Yildirim, Billy Joe, and then he's about to fight Caleb Plant in September. Those 4 fights, you know, he's cleaned out a whole division. Does that in itself deserve to be pound for pound number 1? Yes. But I think it's a toss-up, really. It's a toss-up. It's a toss-up because, like I said to you, I think Pacquiao in his last 3 fights has fought at a higher level than Canelo. I think if Canelo, obviously the fight with Plant goes ahead and he does beat Plant, then I think you have to make a stronger case for Canelo. But if you go on Canelo's last 3 fights and Pacquiao in August beats, then straight away, if he was to beat Errol Spence, after the next day, he becomes pound for pound number 1 for me. Until Canelo beats Plant. And if Canelo was to beat Plant, then the discussion goes up in the air again. But I think because Pacquiao's going to fight first. Pacquiao beats Spence, for me, he's pound for pound number 1 on August 22nd, without question. But if Canelo then beats Plant, then obviously it makes a good debate for... It's up in the air then. It's up in the air. Guys, I want to touch on... I want to touch on a Joyce Takam, which is happening tomorrow. We've had the weigh-in. I haven't really talked about this fight. It's kind of gone under the radar, but I'll talk a little bit about it now. I think it's a good fight for Joyce. I think it's a kind of a tick-over fight. I do think Takam is a guy. He's very durable, tough guy. Comes to fight. He's a good fighter. I like Takam. He always brings it. I think it might be Joyce's toughest test to date in terms of the experience that Takam's got. But I don't know how much Takam's got left. Takam's at the end of the road now. I think he's obviously looking to catapult himself in a position by beating someone like Joyce to get another big fight. He's had a lot of big fights, Takam. You know, he fought Chisora. He fought Anthony Joshua. You know, he fought Joseph Parker. You know, this is a guy that's been around the block. You know, didn't he fight Povetkin as well back in the day? I'm not sure. I can't remember. He might have done. I think he might have fought Povetkin back in the day. But he's fought a lot of good fighters. Takam has. He's very durable. But I just think Joyce, he's a very big heavyweight. He's very strong. He's very strapped. He's a big lad. And I just think that Joyce's pressure. I think Joyce's jab. I think that's going to be a problem for Takam. And I don't know whether Takam's got what he had a couple of years ago. So I do think it's a late stoppage for me, or might even get him out of there early if he puts a lot of pressure on him early. I think Joyce wins soundly. I think, and most importantly, I think Takam is not that big. Joyce is big, man. He's a big guy. And I think Joyce is a problem for anybody. I think although he's quite methodical, and a lot of people don't find him very exciting and they think he's robotic. I think his fighting style is a style which don't look great, but it's very effective, and I think he's a problem for a lot of guys. Whether he can beat some of the top guys with his style, I think it's for us, we have to wait and see. I think someone like Joshua may be too quick, maybe too mobile, because although Joshua's not the fastest himself, I think he's so much quicker than Joyce. Joyce is almost fights in slow motion, but he's a good fighter. Like I said, I think he's a lot harder to deal with than what he looks on television. I think he's a lot better than what people give him credit for. I think good fighter, man. He's a good fighter, and he's a problem, without question. That ain't no easy fight for anybody, man. So that's just my take on Joyce Takam. I think Joyce wins by stoppage, to be honest with you. But that's just my take. I'll leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Who do you think wins that fight? Do you think Takam can cause the upset, or do you think Joyce will just walk through Takam? Leave your thoughts, guys. Let me know what you think. And guys, remember to please like, share, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.